Jacob Zichron Livrocha, the unsung hero of Anglo Jewry in terms of English Jewry. Someone who was a teacher in the college known as Jews College, unfortunate name, but that's what it was called. What I call it, the mini YU, and taught Jonathan Sachs and taught a lot of other people over the years, and passed away 2 years ago, Erev Channuka, and I just want to dedicate this shir in his memory. This evening, what we're going to do, as Mike has said, like maybe challenging convention or possibly going into subjects which are not so conventional, I have to say. But I spent 4 years in Gateshead in England and then 3 years in Kollel in Eretz Yisrael. And the first topic I'm going to talk about never came up in any discussion ever. I heard it in a shir later on in London, and it blew my mind. I really was a bit shocked that it never been mentioned at any time during the yeshiva studies. Basically, what we're going to do, look at two very serious questions. First, I have to apologize to Winston Churchill for borrowing his famous phrase, a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. Many of you, I hope some of you will know at least, that that's referring to anybody? Who was he talking about when he said, he had a wonderful turn of phrase, Winston Churchill. What a great man. Referring to Russia, believe it or not, still applies today in the year 2022, a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. What a way of putting it. Something for you to think about. Chanukah is definitely a holiday we're very comfortable with, right? I think we have this comfort zone of dealing with Chanukah, and 2 weeks ago Rabbi Khan already pushed us a bit out of that comfort zone. I'm going to push you a little bit more. The way I see it is, I'm going to share with you a story. This again I heard from Rabbi Sachs many years ago. He did a number of conferences in London, and he introduced one of the conferences with this great story, which I'm sure you all know, about two yeshiva guys living in Bnei Brak, high-tech yeshiva guys, right? This is a concept which maybe exists today. I think it does. And they decided they were going to make a car which ran on ruchnius. It ran on spiritual commands. And the car was amazing. There it is, sitting outside their base medrash. And it ran on two commands. When you wanted to go, you got in the seat, held the steering wheel, and you said, Baruch Hashem, and the car goes off. Amazing. And when you wanted to stop, you say the word Amen, screech of the brakes, maybe in Israel, I suppose it does screech over here, and boom, the car stops. Fabulous. And this went round Bnei Brak. You don't need internet Bnei Brak because things go around quicker by word of mouth than even by the computer. It's amazing. And everybody knew. And Rabbi Yankele and Rabbi Chaim and everybody comes to see this amazing car. And of course, one of the great Rabbanim, he wants to give it a whirl. He wants to see this. You heard about it. It's kind of amazing. So the two guys said, Rabbi, you can do it, no problem. Just remember, when you say Baruch Hashem, it goes, and when you say Amen, it stops. Don't forget. He gets in the car and he says, he's holding the wheel, he goes, Baruch Hashem, and there it goes. It starts running. And it's running, and he's out of Bnei Brak, heading towards the coast, not very far from where they are. And the car picks up speed and, goes 20, 30, talking about kilometers, 40, 50. And he decides it's time maybe to end the demonstration. And he says, Amen. Oi, nothing happens. And he's thought maybe he didn't say it loud enough. So he says another Amen. He says it with a bit more kavanah. And still nothing happens. And already it's up to 60 and he's doing 7. Oi, it's beginning to get really, really serious. And he summons all of his car because he can see he's coming to a cliff. And what's going to be? And he's intense. And he says that fantastic Amen. And the car screeches to a halt 1 inch before the cliff. He sits back in the seat and he says, Baruch Hashem. It's a great story, not true. Possibly 2022, it can happen. We've got a comfort zone where we sit back in our seat and we talk about Chanukah and we say, Baruch Hashem, I've heard it all before. I've heard about how to light the candles, which direction, which candle first, and whether it's got to be oil or can I use wax, and all of the stuff that we've heard maybe for many, many moons. And I don't denigrate it. On the contrary, fabulous, wonderful. Chanukah is such it's an uplifting time, especially when it feels like, I would say in London, this would be September temperature, even though it's December. I'm not dreaming of a white Chanukah this year. I'm sure I'm not. The reality of it is that Chanukah, there is a comfort zone which we need to move out of. And in two specific areas. One which I said is very well known, but the first area which is not so well known. And Rabbi Carr mentioned it a few weeks ago, the question of Chanukah not being in the Mishnah. It's a pilei ploy. And we sit back, and even if we heard the question, well, not such a problem because it's not halachic. Why do I need to deal with it? It's for the scholars, for the academics, but it should bother all of us. We know that the Mishnah was composed around the year 200 of the Common Era. Rabbi, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, edited the Mishnah, redacted the Mishnah, all different words that we use. Unbelievable how he did it, and again, many, many books if you want to read about that. But there's one big glaring, something's missing. There's an incredible holiday which doesn't feature, and that's the holiday of Chanukah. I've got Mishnah Sukkah, and I've got Mishnah Rosh Hashanah, I've even got Mishnah Megillah. So I've got a rabbinic holiday mentioned in the Mishnah. Chanukah, nishtu. It's not to be, well, not quite. There's this great story in Mishnah Baba Kama, I think it is, where the poor guy with the camel, right? Every time I go to the old city, I always think of this, because you see these guys running around with donkeys piled up with stuff. So, in Eretz Yisrael, you put your Chanukah out in the street, or in the front yard, or whatever, and the story is a shopkeeper, he was lighting candles outside his store, and the Chanukah is burning. Along comes Abdul with his camel, and the camel, or probably it was Moshe, whoever he was, and the camel, the stuff on the camel sort of catches fire from the Chanukah lights. That's a Mishnah. And the Mishnah talks about who's liable, who's responsible, who's not responsible. It's a whole discussion. But that is not Hilchas Chanukah, that's Hilchas Nezek, that's to do with damages. The example is from Chanukah. But very simply, why is there no Masechet Chanukah? And I'm going to share with you some answers which are truly mind-blowing. As Mike pointed out, I don't like to say things off the top of my head. I always like to show that there is a source, even though the source is very challenging. Let's have a look, for instance, here. We're not going to get through all of this. I don't want to put everybody off by saying we're going to be here till 3 o'clock in the morning because you see so many sources. This is to take away, something for you to look at during Chanukah. I hope it's, readable and you're able to access it and look at it. Just want to give you a little bit of a range of ideas. The first idea, which is mind-blowing, is a comment from Rabbi Yosef Cairo. Rabbi Yosef Cairo, let me put it this way. We're going to go on a trip this evening. You just got a wonderful email about the trip coming up, and it's a wonderful thing that one goes to discover Eretz Yisrael through this group. I think it's a phenomenal idea. And we are having a tiyul this evening around the world. We are going from country to country in terms of understanding and getting into this subject that we're talking about, the first subject of why Chanukah is not in the Mishnah, and then later on with part 2. We start off with the Yosef Kar. We go up to Tzvat. We're around the year 1500, 1520, and unbelievable story. The Sefer that he wrote, many Sfarim, wrote the Shulchan Aruch, but one of the Sfarim which is attributed to him is called Magid Meisharim. Magid Meisharim, I don't know how to tell you about this if you don't know about it, some of you I'm sure do. When he used to go to sleep at night, he was so osek b'Torah, his mind was so taken up with Torah that he had a chavrusa even while he was asleep. The chavrusa was a malach, an angel. An angel came to him and told him chidushei Torah. Unbelievable. And he woke up in the morning and he wrote it all down. And this went on. I don't know how many years this went on. It was written in a book, Magid Meisharim. And it's unbelievable that the book does exist. Pop down the road to Modin Elit, one of the bookstores there. You probably could buy it even today. I'm sure it's available. And he writes the following. This is number 1 on the sheet. Third line down. V'tama davar leda'ati pirsumam bizman chibur Mishnah Ushehemu devarim mufursamim. He says there's no Masechet Chanukah because everybody knows it. By the time the Mishnah came along, let's put the history, the date into perspective. Chanukah 167 to 165 BCE, and you got the Mishnah 200 CE, so you do the math, 200 plus 165, 365 years, a long time. So he argues, says Rabbi Yosef Karo, that by the time they got to the Mishnah, to the days of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, 365 years, they all know what to do. They don't need, they don't need Mishnah Chanukah, which I don't understand as an answer. It really doesn't make sense to me. Because, 365 years, we've had sukkahs for by then, probably for, getting on for 1,000 plus years. And we still need the Mishnah Sukkah. We still need how to know how high it is, how wide it is, what all the different inyonim. It's a very difficult answer, number one. I leave you to look at it. It's strange. A separate solution, which is where things get really, really complicated, and again, I don't want to go into this in great detail, is the whole concept of, it's in fact a tradition which the Vilna Gaon reported that certain Masechta were lost. Vilna Gaon claims that there was a Masechta called Masechet Emunah. I would love to have seen it. A whole section of Mishnah dealing with emunah, presumably dealing with matters of faith, of belief. And it was lost. So the Vilna Gaon, in that tradition, now we've moved to Lithuania, so we've gone from Tzvat bang into Eastern Europe. The Vilna Gaon tells us, in fact, this is reported by his nephew, his great nephew, according to this what I found here. This number 2, V'amali ech sheshama מהגאון מרן הרב אליהו ז"ל שהיו כמה וכמה מסכתות שבי על המידות כמו מסכת Anova. There was a tractate for modesty or humility. Wow. Where is it? Wish we could see it. Umasechta bitachon, and a tractate dealing with matters of trust, faith in God. Ukadame rakshe nevda mimenu. It's lost. And so the Vilna Gaon would say, according to this, that Chanukah did have a tractate. There was a Masechet Chanukah lost. And this is also found in number 3, that there is an even more interesting suggestion, I don't think it comes from the Vilna Gaon, who says that this was actually written down as a series of Mishnayot by Hillel and Shammai. Now again, learning the laws of Chanukah, you can't avoid the famous argument. Hillel and Shammai, you would walk down a street in Modi'in. It's all happening around here. This is unbelievable being in Modi'in on Chanukah. It's my first year here. It's one of the great places to be. The place to be, I would say, on Chanukah. And what happens is, you go back 2,000 years, you're walking down whatever, Emek Dotan in those days, house number 1, on the second night of Chanukah, 7 candles burning. Next house along, 2 candles burning. Why is that going on? We know, because the first house was a Beit Shammai, or a Shammai follower, and he was of the opinion you go 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, you count down. Whereas, according to the second house on the street, he follows Hillel, you go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 till you get to number 8. Perfect. And that again is interesting, that the suggestion is both Hillel and Shammai got together, they corroborated together to write Masechet Chanukah. Fascinating. And again, this is all bound up with a whole discussion about something called Megillat Ta'anit. I really don't, again, a bit too academic, and I don't want to get into it, but I've got it on the page here, and please do your diligence if you want to look at this. It really is interesting, but not for this evening. It's a bit too academic. But I come to the number 4, and I'm in awe. I'll talk about him literally for 1 minute. Rabbi Margoli, Zichron Livrocha. If you've never heard of him, he was a librarian. Let's be honest. That's what he did. He came to Eretz Yisrael, I don't know, maybe even in the 30s, I think before the war, and he became a librarian. I think the Sifriyat Rambam, if there is such a thing, somewhere in Eretz Yisrael, maybe in Haifa, I don't know where it was, and that was his job. He was the librarian. It happened that he was the librarian that you'll never meet in 100 years because he read every book that he got his hands on. So the library, and I think it was a Torani library, if I'm not mistaken, every book in the library he read. And not only had he read, but he knew it by heart. And, this was a man with a phenomenal mind. And not only did he know all this stuff by heart, but he started writing his own books. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this man wrote over 150 Sforim. Some of them very small, some of them incredibly detailed. The yeshiva guys know the Sefer on Masechet Sanhedrin. It's very, very well used in yeshivot. But he wrote books on names of angels. He wrote books on commentary, on a commentary, and unbelievable, really unbelievable man. Rabbi Margolius passed away in 1971, not so long ago. He says something about Chanukah which is phenomenal. Let's put it like this. We've got to come to terms with, as I said, get out of our comfort zone when it comes to the enemies of Israel. We talk about Chanukah, we talk about Mityavnim, we talk about the Hellenists, we know all about that. But we go to the days of Rabbi, and there we're talking about the Romans. And the Romans, we know, were not particularly nice people. They were really not nice people. But there's a bit of a misconception. And the misconception is that they weren't rabid anti-Semites every moment of every day of the year. They did become very anti the people that they had conquered in one situation, which is always referred to in the history books. It's a situation of rebellion. As soon as you rebelled against the Romans, you were in big trouble. That's when they brought the armies and they brought the extra armies. That's the rebellion that destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. 66 CE, the Gemara in Gittin talks about it, the Biryonim and all the people got together and they started trying to push out the Roman invasion of Judea, of Eretz Yisrael, and by 70 the temple was destroyed. The interesting thing, says Rabbi Reuven, is that the Romans not only kept track of rebellion, but they also kept track of what we would nowadays say literary rebellion. If they saw the people that were under their jurisdiction writing about subjects which suggested that we're going to break away from the surroundings, we're going to declare independence, UDI, we're going to the Declaration of Independence, then the Romans would start getting antsy. That's an American word for getting a bit uncomfortable. And the next thing you know, you've got a Roman, they come along and they squash the rebellion, what they look at see as a rebellion, or worst case scenario, they destroy everything in their path. Says the Rabbi Reuven, and he said something which I think is phenomenal. He said that in Mishnah you'll find there are certain things, not only Chanukah is missing. Try and find Mishnah Tefillin. There's no Mishnah on Tefillin. There's a lot of Gemara Menachos, and there's pages and pages of it. But Mishnah, nothing. Almost nothing. And then you look for Mishnah Tzitzis, not there. And he says, not only that, I think he says also, let's just see what he's talking about over here. Things which are, again, part of Torah Shebaal Peh, which would be considered anti-Roman. So, for instance, why is there no Mishnah Tefillin? Why is there no Mishnah of Tzitzis? Because Rabbeinu HaKadosh realized that if he starts writing, editing, bringing together ideas about the Jewish style of dress, the unique style of dress, the fact that people would wear tefillin all day. I was in the Old City on Friday, people were walking around with tefillin, something which seems to be coming, maybe a renewal of something which Yechidim. I remember going to Scheinberg and he was sitting there in tefillin 30 years ago, but see many people in the street in the Old City walking around with tefillin. It was very interesting. The reality of it is, this becomes not just something they wore for davening, they wore it the whole time. It was Jewish dress, and obviously tzitzit. And there are many other things which are missing from the Mishnah because Rebbe understood by editing the Mishnah and putting those things into the Mishnah, the Romans would get the wrong message. That the Jews are declaring a kind of independence of dress. And what comes next is an independence of behavior. They want to have their own government, and they want to have their own army. And the Romans did not wait around for rebellion to take place. They would nix it, they would stop it immediately. Says Rabbi Reuven the same thing with Chanukah. It's so interesting. Chanukah, in the end of the day, represents the ultimate Jewish rebellion. Ma'atim biyad Rabin biyad Ma'atim. We know that what happened, so many people came against us, the armies of Greece and the Mityavnim, and Rabbi Soloveitchik talks about this, and I didn't want to go into this because it was a bit, I know it was a bit upsetting from 2 weeks ago to find out that that Chanukah is about a civil war, much more than about Greeks versus the Jews. Rabbi Soloveitchik says something phenomenal. He says in the Ala Nissim, we don't say, there's one phrase missing. We have Zaydim biyad this and Shoim biyad this. He says there's one phrase missing, Yevonim biyad Yehudim. It doesn't say that. Greeks into the hands of the Jews. Because he says the reality was the main fight was not Yevonim neged Yehudim, it was Yehudim neged Yehudim. It was Jew against Jew. And therefore it doesn't put that in the Ala Nissim. He's talking about the war. It doesn't mention that the Yevonim were given over, the Greeks were given over to the Jews. Because much more focused, that prayer is focused more about what was really going on, which unfortunately was Jew against Jew. But I don't want to go into that because we had a taste of that a few weeks ago, and that is something I want to leave, how should we say? We're getting too far out of our comfort zone if we start talking about that. I want to go back to what Rabbi Reuven says because it's so beautiful. It's right at the bottom in the Hebrew, the last 3 lines on the bottom of the page. And again, I just want to give you a taster. This is like being at a smorgasbord. You're tasting all the different elements here. I can't go into great detail on all of them, but I want to give you a kind of round picture of where the rabbis were going with this particular discussion. Again, Rabbi Reuven, we've traveled back to Eretz Yisrael via, he must have come from Eastern Europe, I don't know where. And he writes beautifully at the bottom just to say, actually let's just turn over the page to page 2 of the handout. Just where, the second line in the middle of the line, he says, Navin, lamish mishnato devarim chashuvim ikarim b'tard Yisrael. So why did Rabbi miss out all of these important elements in our Jewish life of keeping Torah? Kein lo shina inyan Chanukah v'chotea b'mishnah ba'od asher l'chod Purim kava masech. You'll say to me, there is Purim in the Mishnah. Zeu la'asher kol ke'ilu hayu lamrod ruach romiyim shechashvum kinyanim politim. He is very interesting. He says that the things that were missed out by Rebbe, Chanukah, Tefillin, tzitzis, and a whole bunch of other things that he lists there, they were considered political by the Romans. Acts which would be politically motivated, which would lead possibly to rebellion, and the Romans don't want to hear of it. And therefore, Rebbe, as a kind of protection of the Jewish people, decided not to include Chanukah in the Mishnah. It's a wow. It's a wow. Again, if I'd said that off my own head, I don't know whether I would have even been able to say it. Rabbi Reuven Margolius, who was a Gaon Olam of the first degree, if he says it, it's certainly worth taking note. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, we're back to Eretz Yisrael of the late 20th century. Oh, Shlomo, I didn't intend to make this into a show about Gedolim, but this man was just, I don't know, there's so many stories one can say. I just want to share just one thing. In my kollel in 1983, Nechama Leibovitz was approached to come and teach in the kollel, which was a fantastic opportunity, and I sat with Nechama in the class for 6 months, totally petrified of this very awesome lady, to put it mildly, but what a phenomenal pedagogue. Everything about it was just incredible. But the head of the kollel, Rabbi Cohen, Shbi Gazun, is still running the kollel, still in Mevaseret Zion. He approached Nechama and she agreed. She's coming to teach in the kollel. The problem was that some of the kollel guys were very uncomfortable about it because, there's a woman teaching and could the Rebbitzins come, could the kollel wives, it was a whole parsha there. But before we even got to that parsha, the question came up about asking the Chama to come to the kollel. So Rabbi was very close to Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and he went to ask him. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman was such a piquer, was such a smart man, and so apolitical. I don't know how he managed to stay out of politics, but he really did. It's unbelievable. And what he said to Rabbi was brilliant. He said the following. He said, I know what you want. He said, listen, if you can find somebody better than Nechama Leibovitz, get the other guy, get the other person. He's not giving you a heter to bring her in, But he's saying, if you can find somebody else who's better than her, bring the other person. Brilliant. That you won't have the guys knocking down his door saying, Shalom Zalman, you allowed a woman to teach in Akola. They're not going to take, because he didn't say that. What he did say, he answered the question, but in the most clever, smart way that you could ever imagine. And that was Rabbi Shlomo Zalman. He was a great man. He writes something, again, very interesting. No Chanukah in the Mishnah. Why? And he says like this, and it's on the page. He said the Greeks wanted to take away our Torah. They wanted to, particularly Torah Shebaal Peh. So he says, what happened to Chanukah? It stayed pure Torah Shebaal Peh. We know that Torah Shebaal Peh means Torah was conveyed by word of mouth. And it was conveyed by word of mouth. It stayed as an oral exercise. We know that Mishnah started writing it down, the famous tradition, because we started forgetting. We couldn't keep all that information in our heads. We had to write the thing down. But Chanukah, as a principle of what it represented, the preservation of Torah Shebaal Peh, because of that, it was kept absolutely oral. It was never written down. Certainly not at Mishnaic, at the time when Mishnah was redacted. Very interesting. Again, a Chiddush Gadol, phenomenal Chiddush. And to a certain extent, of all the answers that we're going to go through in this particular subject, I like Rabbi Shlomo Zalman's approach because it gets to the heart of Chanukah. Chanukah is about being Jewish in the deepest way possible. And being Jewish means having this relationship with not only Torah Shebichtav, but Torah Shebaal Peh. And to keep it purely oral for all those years, as opposed to writing it down as in the form of Mishnayot, it rings in me. It has a certain resonance. The sixth answer, and this is the one that really is mind-blowing. I don't even know where to start. We're moving back to Hungary. We're going to the Chassam Sofer, Rav Moshe Sofer, around the year 1820. So we moved back a few hundred years, but we are coming into the courts of the great, great rabbis of the 19th century. And Rav Moshe Sofer was one of the greats. He says something which is so mind-blowing that if I didn't have a backup for this, I would never say this in public. But Rav Moshe Sofer said, at Chassam Sofer, I've got someone I could rely on. He says the following. He said that Rabbi was descended from King David. He knew his yichus, and he goes back to David HaMelech. What is Chanukah all about? For those 3 years, a phenomenal achievement of re-establishing, rededicating the Beit HaMikdash and getting rid of the stopping as much as you could the influence of the Greeks in Eretz Israel. Fabulous, incredible. However, go 20 years after that story, go into the book of Maccabees, which is not in what we call the canon of the Bible, it's in the Sfarim Chitzoniyim, and you read the stories, you realize Chanukah became a big problem. And the problem is that once it finished, the Maccabim, who were Chashmonaim or Kohanim, they took over leadership, they became kings. And you had kings, Aristobulus, all had Greek names later on, and a lot of famous names and a lot of famous problems as well. And Chassam Sofer says that unbelievable, right? I suppose to imagine there was politics in the early days in Eretz Israel, maybe it's not so unbelievable. But the fact that he says what he says is truly unbelievable. He said Rabbi tried to preserve the connection to King David in the purest way possible. By giving Chanukah prominence, he was saying, he was worried, he's giving a heksha to what Chanukah represented, which was a breakaway from Jewish tradition, not at the time of the event, but afterwards. Afterwards, what's the breakaway? That Kohanim became Malachim. It wasn't meant to be. Lo Yosef Shevim Yehuda, it says in the Pasuk, which Yehuda became the king. And Yehuda, David HaMelech, and eventually Melech HaMashiach. So if you're having Chanukah as a Mishnah, but being redacted by Rabbi, and this Chassam Sofer suggests, again, as I said, I'm not going to suggest this, but he suggested, Rabbi felt to preserve the family, the tradition, the honor, the yichus of the line of David, he kept Chanukah out of the Mishnah. Wow. I was waiting for lightning and thunder to take place over here, and I was waiting for the ground to open up, because it is so radical to say such a thing. right? To put in the sphere of Judah the Prince any sort of political ideals in terms of writing down the Mishnayot, but says Chassam Sofer, that's exactly what happened. It's a wow. And you'll see if you take the page away, I quoted here, there's an article by Moshe Tzvi Neria, the very famous Rosh Hashiva of Kfar Ro'eh, and also there's somebody in Bnei Brak, Rabbi Yomin Shmuel Hamburger, I'm assuming originally from German background, writes about this story because a lot of people said he couldn't have said it. Some said he couldn't say such a. How could he talk about politics in the mind of Rabbeinu HaKodesh? The argument is made very strongly that the tradition of what Chassam Sofer said in this instance has been documented correctly, and it's known as the Shit of the Chassam Sofer. I've even got a sefer at home which brings this question and brings one answer to the whole question in the name of Chassam Sofer. So it's hit, and this came out of Bnei Brak, so it even hit Bnei Brak a few years ago. The reality of it is that when we have all of these answers coming together, as I said, we've done a tiyul. We've gone from Hungary, we've gone to Eretz Yisrael, we've gone all over the place. The reality of it is that all of these answers really are challenging. They've moved us, as I said at the beginning, possibly out of what we were comfortable about Chanukah, because it does raise that question of the aftermath of Chanukah, which again, as I said, I don't want to go into in too much detail. But the fact is, it's such an interesting sugya. And here comes the kicker. You go to the year 1891. In fact, if you have a link on your computer to something called Hebrew Books, they're very easy to remember, HebrewBooks.org. This is a webpage that is so mind-blowing, I can't even begin to describe it. There are literally thousands and thousands of books on that webpage. It's taken, I think it was, I don't know whose library it was, I think it was the Bavitcher Rebbe's library, the original, not the Rebbe who passed away in America, but from Russia. And these books were photocopied. These were, nowadays you would say scanned. I don't know exactly whether it was scanned or what they did. And the books are to be found on this webpage. And not only that, but there's newspapers, there's things that came out, different periodicals, particularly at the end of the 19th century. And one of those periodicals you can find there is called Hatzafira. And in this periodical, this was a periodical known for the opinions, very controversial opinions of maskilim. People who, many of them went against what we would call the basic Jewish tradition, particularly in terms of oral tradition, in terms of rabbinic tradition. Many of them were Talmidei Chachomim, there's no question about it. But they presented ideas which were radical in the extreme. So this gentleman here, I've mentioned number 7, Chaim Zelig Slonimsky, right? We've never heard of him, I've never heard of him, but that's his name. He wrote an article with the following conclusion. He did kind of a simple math. He said, Chanukah's not in the Mishnah, therefore that proves Chanukah never happened. Whoa, okay, that's what he said. He incurred a little bit of an upset amongst all the rabbinic fraternity, who obviously were reading these periodicals, because they says that it doesn't follow. The fact it's not in the Mishnah, we can answer according to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, we can answer according to Rav Margolius, can answer according to Chassam Sofer. We've got all the different answers that you want to bring to explain. But as far as this gentleman Slonimsky was concerned, it's absolute proof Chanukah, as related, or as we have it, the tradition never took place. And of course, this is very challenging, and chas v'sholom, again, I only bring it to show you how far this debate went, how far this question pushed itself into traditional Jewish life. It's very, very interesting. It was rejected, and sure, obviously today we certainly don't take note of this, although there are Rabbanim writing Sfarim even today who mention this. They mention the opinion, even though the opinion is obviously so radical and so untraditional, it's rejected completely kicked out of court, as they say. That's part 1. And that's the question, that's the riddle of the enigma of Chanukah not being in the Mishnah. And as I said, I leave you to read this for yourselves and do some more research. There are many answers, some of them very unusual, and I try to give you a taste a little Vorspeise. Question number 2 is the most famous question of Chanukah that's ever been stated, and that I did hear about in the yeshiva. And that's the question of why we keep Chanukah for 8 days. And everybody, I hope most people know the question. It's a famous question. Notice the Beis Yosef's question. Back to Joseph Kari. It always comes back to Yosef Kari. Amazing. He said the following. He said, look, according to this story, we know they had enough oil for 1 day. If they have enough oil for 1 day, and it burned for 8 days, how long was the miracle actually? 7 days. Wasn't 8 days, because the oil lasted 1 complete day. Right? So you had enough oil for a day. You had the Chanukah, the menorah burning for 8 days. Do your math. 8 minus 1, the miracle lasted 7 days. We keep Chanukah 8 days. Question is, why? Unbelievable, simple question, but this question travels the world. Another to you. I have a sefer which I bought in London many years ago from a very significant Talmud Chacham who lives there called Eli Khan. He found 158 answers to that question, which you're not going to hear tonight. You may hear 1 or 2, but I'm not going through the whole lot. It is unbelievable Torah on this question. Let's talk about maybe the most radical answer, and this might spoil your evening, but, as I said, the comfort zone, the Baruch Hashem, I'm trying to move you a little bit out of it. The most radical, if you go to the last page, I suppose you need to know this, even though it might be very upsetting. Megillat Antiochus. If you came from a Hasidic background, and you have the Sefer where you light the Chanukah lights, got all the, what I call the Hosafot, all the extra things that you say and all the Tehillim, you'll find usually printed in those Sfarim is Megillas Antiochus. I have no information about where it comes from. I know it's very old. It's called Megillat Antiochus. It's the story in the Megillah, as we would call it, of Antiochus, the famous king who came against the Jews in the Chanukah story. There's a footnote there which really, it certainly spoiled my day when I read it, even though it comes from a very, very interesting source, and it's right in the middle of the page, and it's taken from the She'iltas of Rabbi Gaon. Rabbi Gaon, we've moved to Baghdad, we've moved back to Bovel, about 1,200 years ago. And he says something which is, I don't know, I can't teach this to my grandchildren because they'd be upset. They really would be upset. He says, you know what, the whole tradition of the oil is wrong. He said, we were all told, as kids, I grew up with this, I went to Hebrew school, enough oil for 1 day. He says, look in the She'iltas, look in the tradition over there, from Rabbi Gaon, he says his tradition was there wasn't even enough oil for 1 day. Whoa. Right? Just change the whole Chanukah story with one strike of the pen. Unbelievable. There wasn't enough oil even for 1 day. And it's a footnote in what is called Megillat Antiochus. But it's there. Have a look, you'll find it brought as a tzorich iyun. I think it's a question mark. Of course, that answers our question. Why is Chanukah for 8 days? Because there's not enough oil even for 1 day. Then the miracle lasted for 8 days. That's fine. But the concept that we're now going to change the whole story of Chanukah and say to you that it wasn't oil for 1 day, wasn't even enough oil for 1 day, that maybe is too overwhelming. That's moved you so far out of your comfort zone, I'm not sure what to say. It's like going over the cliff, in the original story. So I mention it, I give it a certain amount of credibility, but I leave you to mull it over. The answer I want to share with you, and I want to talk about a little bit, is from Chaim Soloveitchik. We're moving back to Lithuania. Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, what do you say about Reb Chaim? Reb Chaim, there's too much to say. My favorite anecdote is a very short one, but there's so many anecdotes. He was asked a question, I think it was a Shiloh on Yom Kippur. And he was known to be very lenient, allowing people to eat on Yom Kippur, cholim, people who, were in difficult situation. And many people argued with him. And they said to him, Reb Chaim, you're being very lenient in the laws of Yom Kippur. They almost criticized him for it. And he looked at them and he said, and of course he was a great Talmudist and such a brilliant mind, apparently, Bal Chesed, everything about him was so unique. And he turned around and said, my friend, he said, you missed the point. He says, I'm not being I'm not being lenient on the laws of Yom Kippur. He says, I'm being machmir, I'm being strict on the laws of Pikuach Nefesh. I'm being strict on the fact that if this person is even potentially in a dangerous situation, life and death situation, I've got to allow him to eat. And he saw things from both sides. He would look at a problem and he would look at it literally from all different angles. The story, somebody came to him and needed stocker before Pesach and was prepared to take milk. I think everyone knows this story. And he gave money, but he gave a lot more money, right, than what the person asked for. And the Rebbetzin had complained to Chaim, Reb Chaim, what are you doing? You're giving away all our savings. So he said, look, this Yid came, he wants to use milk for the 4 cups of wine, he wants to take milk. Clearly, he's not only missing wine, he's missing everything else, right? And the fact is that, particularly as we normally have a fleshig meal on the Seder, and he wants to do milk, there's something really, really missing in this guy's life. Instead of giving him the $20, he gave him the $200, something equivalent, enormous amount of money. And the reality is, this was the greatness of Reb Chaim. I had a Rebbe, my Rosh Yeshiva, Reb Leib Govich, was a chavrusa with Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. So I feel connected, even though we're talking about a Rav who died in 1918. But because this is the greatness of Torah, that when you've connected with people who've come from that world and had those connections, pre-war connections, you all of a sudden, instead of reading about them in a book, they came alive. Because when Reb Leib Govich, the Zichron Livrocha, Rosh Yeshiva in Geitzer, spoke about Chiddush of Reb Chaim, it was something that he heard from him. And when he spoke about Reb Chanan Wasserman, he sat with him and he learned with him. And these men, they may not be alive physically, but they're certainly with us to this day. Everything that they stand for, everything that they represent. And I'm saying all of this because the answer that Reb Chaim gives on the question, why not 8, why not 7 days, and we keep 8 days, is so, what I would call typical Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim says the following, I'll explain it. Used to be like this in Israel. I don't know when they stopped. I remember we lived in the 80s. You went to what we call in England, the garage, gas station, and you walked in, or drove in, right? And there was it 95 and 97, all the different numbers of different petrol that you could get, right? I'm not making that up. Right, and certainly I know in England they had it, maybe even in America they used to have it. Different, you had charge and supercharged, and if you drove a tank, then you would have a different petrol for that, and diesel, all the different types of gas, petrol that you could want. Nowadays, much easier because it's all 95 over here, and I'm glad about that. The reality of it is, says Reb Chaim, and it's so beautiful what he says. He says the oil, the story is not the way the Shilters said it, and I'm glad to say most people don't learn like that. Reality is, the story is the way we've always understood it, that there was enough oil for 1 day and it burned for 8 days. But he said, you've made a mistake about how you understand what happened. It's not that an amount of oil burnt in the sense of what he calls kamut, in terms of the amount itself that went down every day. He says what happened was that the eichut, he says the quality of the oil changed. It went from what I would say 95, whatever that means, to 98. It went in quality from being regular to being supercharged. So that is the Channuka miracle, even on the first day, that the oil not only burned for the 8 days, but it became a different quality of oil. Instead of being oil which was something which was regular, it became supercharged, super holy. It became super infused with nace, with miracle, with everything that we put into it. And of course, this again to me is what Reb Chaim was all about. Looking at something and seeing the other side of the coin. Not seeing it just as a miracle in quantity, but seeing it as a miracle in quantity, in the quality as well. And that is to me the most beautiful answer to this question. And as I said, there are hundreds of answers. Chanukah represents a time when Am Yisrael went from a situation of quantity to quality. At those 3 years, when they fought for the Beit HaMikdash, when they fought for their lives, when Matisyahu stands up and says, Michamocha, Maccabim, etc., everything. When I was in the army, we even marched to the Maccabee song. It's unbelievable how we could do that, but we did. The reality of it is the songs, the aura of Chanukah is so powerful because it became a holiday which was based not just on amounts, but it became a holiday of quality. And of course, that follows that you should use the best quality even today. Try and use olive oil, etc. All of these things become so powerful in the imagery of Chanukah. And all the other stuff that I've got on the page here, I'll let you look at it because I know we're sort of running out of time. And the whole famous discussion about whether they divided the oil into 8 parts and how can you rely on a miracle, it's all here, and I'm not going to go through it because it's well known. But the sources are here, and please look at this in your own time. I just want to share with you one final thought because it's breathtaking. In London, for many years, one of the Dayanim was a Dayan originally from Vienna, called Dayan Baumgarten, Zichron Livrocha. My father-in-law was very close to him, and we lived in northwest London. And he used to walk 2 hours every Shabbos before Pesach, Shabbos HaGadol, and Shabbos Tshuva to go and hear the drosha of Rabbi Baumgarten, which was in North London, 2 hours away. He was so attached to this man. He was so connected. He was a short, very short guy. Really, you saw him, and he was, didn't give that impression. But as Zisa Yid, such a Tyra Yid, he was a very, very special man. And he said very simply, he said the greatness of Chanukah. The Rabbi